5 centuries, the Americas have been the meeting place of all the races and cultures of the world.
When I see all those people who may one day mix all together to become the oldest dream of the Americas, the dream of Bolivar, one continent, one country.
This series takes us on a journey through the vast expanse and diversity of the continent, its gods, its inequalities, its struggles, its hopes.
This is the crossroads of America. This is where everything is going to be happening, where the world is going to open in the Americas. You are exactly in the middle of it.
The initial culture shock of discovering Christopher Columbus and the Europeans on the shores of America echoes through the centuries. In constant flux, the Americas search for identity.
There's nothing wrong with the differences. You should celebrate the differences. Yes. You should make use of the differences.
Tolerate the differences.
Well, no, more than tolerate. You should build on the differences. Yes.
From the Arctic Circle to Tierra del Fuego, cultures and religions merge, clash, and redefine themselves.
Yes, but the cultural differences you're talking about, you've seen English Canada. They're not perceived by the Americans. They don't know that here we speak French.
Seasoned American traveler and novelist Paul Theroux.
If you travel from north to south, you keep encountering strange cultures, strange religions, strange music, strange sights, wilderness, and you think, I'm lost. But that's the great thing, because you're actually in the most civilized, what I consider to be the most civilized and productive, the most literary, and the most interesting and free place on earth.
Denis Laferrière is a writer. Born in Haiti, he later settled in Montreal. In 1990, he left Canada for Miami. He wanted to live in the very heart of the Americas.
I'm going to show you the most important thing of all. Something very, very important. It's called the chrome. The name is strange, but it's the exact spot where the collision occurs. When you talk about culture shock, bam, that's where it happens. It's mysterious. It's in the middle of nowhere, but it's very important. It's a Miami secret. You'll see. What makes Miami such a vital place is that all of Latin America, all of the Caribbean arrives here by plane and boat. Thousands arrive here every month. Cubans, Colombians, Haitians, Peruvians, from everywhere. When they arrive, they have to go through this bottleneck, a tiny little gate that's called the Chrome North Service Processing Center. But there's a double standard. When Cubans come in, they may spend 3 or 5 days waiting. Then they're picked up by Cuban families or associations. But for Haitians, it's another story. The doors stay shut. And even worse, unimaginable really, is that they can stay in here 6 months. Some have even stayed 2 years. And after waiting 2 years, they're sent back to Haiti. That's where the problem is. Their dream is that the door to Miami opens up a little for them.
Miami is the new hub of the continent. People from all corners of the Americas meet and pass through here. Its location and its large, successful Hispanic population make it the dream city of Latin America.
You want to know why people come to Miami despite all these problems? It's simple, really. It's because it's like the Caribbean. Palm trees, sun, ocean, and it's the United States. That's why. Miami faces the Gulf. It's the soft underbelly of America, so it's become the gateway to this country. I've watched the Cubans. They've helped build a great city here, and they've brought in the Spanish language. You saw how many people speak Spanish everywhere, how money changes hands. My impression is that their only way of getting into the United States is through Miami.
Mira, el piscinero.
Jose Basurto was born in Cuba and trained as an engineer. He left with his family in 1961, fleeing the revolution. In Miami, he's become an entrepreneur, building luxury homes. They sell primarily to Latin Americans for as much as $1 million. Sunset Elementary School celebrates Cuban American Day. The occasion emphasizes the Cuban community's contribution to Miami. Jose Basurto is among the guests. He's both a successful businessman and also the founder of an organization that flies to the rescue of Cuban refugees lost at sea. He's here to tell the students his experiences.
My name is Jose Basurto, and I am a member of an organization called Brothers to the Rescue. Those groups of pilots that in the Strait of Florida make an effort to find the rafters and all of those that are in distress while trying to attempt the crossing of the heavy seas that separate us from Cuba and maybe other countries that are out there, and if they happen to be in distress, we are there for them too. We have found thus far 149 people, 149 in little groups like you see them here, you see? And when they are more than 4 days there, most likely they're not going to make it. So we have to find them within the first 4 days, or what we find is something like this. An empty raft. And that's very sad. Any aircraft on 1337, please relay to Havana Center. This is November 5416 Kilo requesting to give us access to area south of 24 parallel for search and rescue mission, humanitarian search and rescue mission. We're being denied access to space at this time.
Several hours a week, Jose searches the ocean between Florida and Cuba. Often he flies very close to the Cuban shore, even without permission from the control tower in Havana. When he finds refugees, he immediately notifies the U.S. Coast Guard. Jose's costly flights are bankrolled by Miami's Cuban community. They're an American success story. They're well established, and they all remember their own pasts. Each new refugee adds to their prosperity.
Look at the mail. Look at everything coming in. I'll leave it here so you can sort through it, okay?
Jose spends hours every week sifting through huge volumes of mail. Some are financial contributions, hundreds are letters of support.
I'm sending you a little contribution and hope to be more generous in the future.
Let me tell you that all of you boys and girls, you're here in Miami. You're in the right place at the right time. This is the crossroads of America. This is where everything is going to be happening, where the world is going to open in the Americas. You are exactly in the middle of it, where communications will take place. And those of you that has an additional language are going to be able to participate very actively in that process of bringing the world together.
Miami may represent the future in the United States. Sunset Elementary School includes children from every background, but all sing in Spanish. 50% of the people in the Miami area are Hispanic. Recently, a Haitian community joined the Cubans in Miami. Danny Laferrière, the Haitian, French-Canadian American, acts as our guide.
Here, you see Little Haiti. Now we're in the heart of it. This is the famous shopping mall built by Haitians. It was the first small business Haitians started here, and it's been very successful. Haitians are proud of it. The community has really grown. There are lots of Haitians, lots of Haitian shops all around here on Miami Avenue. It's huge, almost a city in itself, really. More than 600,000 Haitians live here. It's enormous, and it's being built up little by little. It's happening slowly over years, because not many make it through the little door, the chrome. But every time someone makes it, they come and live here on one of these little streets. They start small businesses, and they prosper. In this community, well, you never see any whites, even though it's a vast area. You look at people passing by on, say, over there, 2nd Avenue and 56th Street, and you'll never see a white person. Yet it's one of Miami's main streets. I don't know how they do it. They must take huge detours so they won't have to come through here. They're so afraid of Haitians. I don't know why, but that's what ghettos are. In Miami, there's no real blending of cultures. They haven't been cooked together like vegetables in soup. It's a mosaic. People live in separate blocks. For example, here in Little Haiti, there are 600,000 inhabitants, and right next door, on Miami Beach, are Jewish people we never meet. It's the Jewish quarter, a little bit rich. Across from us, even poorer than Little Haiti, there's Liberty City. It's where African Americans live. You'd think blacks and Haitians would have a lot in common, but they never meet.
Once again, the writer Paul Theroux.
If you go to New York City, there's a Mohawk nation in New York City. There's a black nation in New York City. There's a Chinese nation. There's Italy. There's Little Korea. All of those exists within the confines of Manhattan Island. Well, this is also true of Rio, of Buenos Aires, which has a large Italian section, for example, of Quito in Ecuador, of Mexico City. All of them are worlds. It's a whole hemisphere of individual worlds. And each of those worlds has the possibility either to succeed or to fail.
More than ever, the Americas are confronted by cultural diversity. It challenges and uniquely inspires novelist Danny Laferrière.
At that time, I was trying to write a novel. I don't know where I ever got such an ambition, and to survive in America. Only one of the two was possible. I had to choose, but I wanted everything. It's the madness of drunk souls. I wanted to write. I wanted booze, laughter, women. Those fascinating women invented by the modern age, by the Scarsdale diet and the mad passion of older men. I wanted all that was owed to me, the promise of America. I knew America had made many promises to countless people, but I expected it to keep its promise to me. I was furious because I didn't like to be cheated.
In behalf of the City of Hollywood, I, as the mayor, am very proud and happy today to be a part of this great ceremony in which the French Canadians are making a very fine contribution to Hollywood. They have made many contributions on the beach, and now they're coming downtown, and we respect them for their wonderful way of life and their love of life and the love of the American people. We love you very much. Congratulations.
The mayor of Hollywood inaugurates the new offices of the Florida Sun. It's the largest French-language newspaper in the Miami area. Hollywood is a suburb north of Miami. It's home to another community, that of French-speaking Quebecers. More than 100,000 French-speaking Canadians live here year-round. Every year, another 800,000 come for as long as 6 months. The monthly Florida Sun has a huge potential readership. The who's who of Quebec society in Miami are here at publisher Jean Larocque's opening.
Mr. Lorak?
Hello.
It's a pleasure to meet you. Congratulations on your new building. I'm really happy you've done this well in Florida.
I'm very happy you're able to come.
And it's deserved, I'm sure.
Do you want to visit the place?
Absolutely. It would be a pleasure. I was here at the very beginning. How many copies at the beginning?
About 10,000.
10,000. Now, how many?
65,000.
65,000 and increasing all the time.
At first we had 24 pages, but we put it together in a hotel room.
And you just celebrated the 100th edition?
The 100th edition.
That's fantastic, eh?
Jean Larac looks at the future with confidence. The Florida Sun's annual advertising revenues exceed $500,000, and its French-speaking clientele spend more than $1 billion in the region every year.
The Trading Society, 55x3, no color. Then I close with a 5-column color.
The subtitles must have been changed, but I didn't make the changes in the paste-up. Send this one off. I'll have to find another ad to replace it.
Okay, Parrot Jungle and Bicycle Center. Are they the same ads this month?
Yes.
There is a language barrier, but American advertisers can't afford to miss out on this golden opportunity.
Okay, your ad will be $30. Are you going to pay by check or cash?
Yes, we're going to pay by check.
By check, okay.
Who do I make it out to?
Le Soleil de la Floride. Le Soleil de la Floride. I'll spell it for you.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. L-E space S-O-L-E-I-L space D-E space L-A space S-O-S-F-L-O.
Jean Larac consolidates his newspaper market. The president of the Florida Sun, Denis Chartrand, his wife, develops other projects.
In the back of our minds, we were thinking about radio, too, because you're an excellent host. We thought of you and also of another project that is very interesting, I think. Television.
In French?
In French. 24 hours a day.
Good evening, everyone. Direct from Florida, television in French.
A las 4 de la tarde, 51 minutos. Transfert d'argent à Port-au-Prince et dans toute la ville de province d'Haïti.
The greatest shock in the Americas takes place here. It's birth and death. People from Latin America come here to be born, to breathe the oxygen of Miami. And people from the north, from Canada, New York, come down here because they're old. They come here to die. A coffin and a cradle. That's Miami.
Desde la comida más exquisita hasta el más completo friend of the Kennedy family. Radio Claridad 1360 AM. La voz de los colombianos en Miami.
Ted! Hi! Happy Thanksgiving!
La radio internationale du sud de la Floride.
If I write about Miami, I need distance to see the whole tapestry, and it's a very pretty tapestry. I see Little Haiti, Little Havana, Miami Beach, Liberty City, and I see all these people, all these colors, all the accents and languages that one day will melt together to create the oldest American dream. And when I say American, I don't mean just the United States. The oldest American dream, the dream of Bolivar, a single continent, a single country.
Every morning, Yukiyoshi Kishimoto, a peasant from Japan, honors the memory of his ancestors. They're buried at the other end of the world. In 1934, Yukiyoshi settled in Brazil. At 64, he still practices the rituals of his native land. The first Japanese arrived here in 1910. The latest wave came in the early 60s. Known as hard workers, Japanese peasants were brought to Brazil to develop the fast-growing agricultural business. Little by little, they bought up the cheap, abundant land readily available in Sao Paulo state. People like Yoshiyosho Kishimoto had lived all their lives on small farms, so he and his wife simply transplanted their customs here. Their community grew and prospered. Still, they managed to maintain a unique identity separate from the larger Brazilian society. But couples like the Kishimotos are part of a disappearing Brazilian world. Their children face a different reality. Contemporary Japanese Brazilians must mix with others. The community has taken over a considerable segment of the country's fruit and vegetable production, but to do so, small family farms have given way to large-scale agricultural mega-businesses. To have the workers they need, these Japanese companies must draw on a mixed labor pool.
Bye.
This makes the situation in the countryside complex for young people. Occasionally, some align themselves with Japan. Their parents had told them they were first and foremost Japanese. Several, like Irinelli Kishimoto, returned to their ancestral home. But once there, most realize they are primarily Brazilian. The Japanese treat them like strangers. After a year or two, they come back to their real home, Brazil, and the money earned overseas helps them open a little business in the city. Sao Paulo is the largest Japanese city outside Japan. Of the 2 million Japanese who live in Brazil, half live here. The community's success is most evident in this megalopolis of 18 million people. Businessmen, professionals, bankers, they are ensconced at the top of the economic pyramid, even though they constitute only 2% of the country's population. Sao Paulo is the largest distribution center for fruits and vegetables in Latin America. In this one place, Japanese upward mobility is clearly visible. The majority of Brazilian businessmen at the top of the trading hierarchy are of Japanese descent. The workers at the bottom who handle the produce are mostly poor migrants from northeast Brazil. They move with the seasons. Often their only resource is the strength of their arms. This is how illiterate Japanese peasants hired themselves out as cheap labor 80 years ago. Now they are respected, educated, financially secure. Successful integration, but at a price. If it weren't for her Oriental features, it would be difficult to believe Mary Kazui is of Japanese descent. Her mother helps her fit a costume she'll wear in the extravagant Mardi Gras parade.
senhora abaixar bastante. Mas o ouro está roda aí, Mica? Ficou. O ouro está roda aí ou assim tá bom? Embaixo também?
Mary is third-generation Japanese in Brazil. She and her mother speak primarily Portuguese. So do most Japanese Brazilians in Sao Paulo. Mary's husband, Marcos, is a Brazilian of Italian-Portuguese descent. They're typical of many contemporary urban Brazilian couples. Cultural origin is of little importance. They're Brazilian. A young generation breaking free from their roots. Writer Paul Theroux.
Situations which have never existed before, for example, Italians marrying Irish, Poles meeting Irish, Belgians meeting Spaniards. Strange, and I'm just simply talking about Europe. Suddenly people were intermarrying. Why? Because they were Catholic, and they met on the common ground of this hemisphere. Indians marrying Spaniards. Quite a strange thing, you might think, and yet it produced the Mexican culture. So this is in a way wonderful, because race and religion have allowed a kind of synthesis, and class hasn't mattered. On the other hand, I mean, there are situations that arise where there are now Hindus, Buddhists, and so forth meeting in this hemisphere with results which we have not even calculated.
Mary and Marcos own a small cafe far from the Japanese quarter. This Japanese assimilation is a new phenomenon. Like other immigrants, they now meld into a Brazil that prides itself on being a multiracial society. In Sao Paulo, it's traditional to have samba schools on every corner. What's not traditional is the growing number of Japanese Brazilians taking courses. At carnival time, Mary's Saturday nights are reserved for the samba. All cultures here dance to the same rhythm. Brazilian Archbishop Dom Luciano Mendes.
Japanese, Chinese, Korean, and others from many lands all come to Brazil. It is a meeting point, a crossroads for all races. They come with their own strengths and weaknesses. It is a fraternity in the making, a new reality of races who live together, love together, suffer together, and assert their identities. In an era of cultural pluralism, we must appreciate our own roots and show the Brazilian people the diverse richness of their origins.
Since childhood, I've dreamed of the Canadian Rockies. In books, they seem to me like the cathedrals of the Americas.
Homero Arigis is a Mexican poet and novelist. His recent book, Memories of the New World, is an international success. Its major theme is the American soul.
Canada fascinates me. A country with almost the dimensions of a continent. I've arranged meetings with some Canadian writers. I'm sure they'll succeed in introducing me to their cultural universe, confiding their hopes, dreams, and fears for the future. The Toronto novelist John Ralphton Saul has invited me to spend a few days with him in Alberta.
Nice to meet you. Yes,
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, very nice to
Yes.
meet you. I've been hearing
Yes.
about you from everybody.
Yes.
Yeah, from
Yes.
John and then
Exciting.
from people in Toronto as well.
Yes.
For me, Canada is the great unknown north of the United States. It's as if this country only exists in the world's mythology, a bit like an elusive El Dorado. John Saul insisted on meeting me at the foot of the Rockies where he spent part of his life. At 45, he just published a biting essay on our civilization, Voltaire's Bastards.
When you are in Mexico, you have the feeling that the mountains in Canada were built by nature, and the mountains in Mexico were built by gods.
If you look at it as a European, you think, what beautiful scenery, but it really isn't beautiful scenery at all. I mean, I don't think that's what it does to a Canadian. It's really a central part of the mythology, a central part of what people think of themselves as being. And I don't mean by that they think they're, big and strong and courageous and they're going to go into the mountains. But there's a sense that in Canada, the nature has not been controlled, has not been dominated, cannot be.
It's like you feel that this ranch has no limits.
It has no limits.
It goes just to the mountains.
Well, if you go that way, if you can get through, there are no passes right there. You arrive in the Pacific.
Yes.
And you could do it without really hitting civilization in a major way. And if you went in 50 miles and turned north, turned up that way, well, you could go all the way to the Arctic, and you would never see civilization.
A world without doors, infinite horizons where the mythology of native people lives.
We didn't really adopt and integrate into what the native population believed and felt. But I think that it was never lost, it was never entirely lost. And I think it's coming back now. It's very interesting to see how the memory is there and that the native idea of what this is being reintegrated.
This is where I'm meeting the native Indian writer Thompson Highway. I was stunned to learn that more than half of Canada's indigenous people live in cities. I met Thompson Highway in Toronto, a few feet from his theater, the Native Arts Centre, a venue for the works of Amerindian playwrights. Thompson Highway is a Cree from northern Manitoba. His work deals with the social problems his people must often confront.
The urban Indian, the urban native, is really only about 30 years old, because it was only during the 1950s, I think anyway, that native people started first, who were before that primarily a country, rural-based society, first started migrating to the cities of Canada in any large numbers. I find that to be a native person living 500 years after Columbus, to be in a situation where I watch this culture that has gained so much in the material sense but lost everything in the spiritual sense. Where on the other hand, with native people in Canada, we don't have anything in the material sense, but we have everything in the spiritual sense.
I was expecting a lot of aggression and bitterness from Thompson Highway. I still can't accept the way Amerindian civilizations were destroyed, Inca, Aztec, Maya. Yet Thompson's message is full of serenity and hope.
An aggressor commits an act of aggression on a victim. I think ultimately in the long run, my theory is that in the long run, it is the aggressor who loses everything. And the victim, you cannot take, you may be able to take everything away from us, all our clothes, all our land, everything, but you will never be able to take our soul. And most of all, you will never be able to take away our laughter.
John Saul is president of the Canadian branch of PEN. He has organized an evening at his home in Toronto so I may meet other members of this International Writers Association. Naturally, we talked about the United States.
What do you think about Canada and of the rest of Americans related to Canada?
Well, you see, up until a few years ago, our view of the United States was it was our closest friend and would always be our closest friend. But because it was also the most powerful nation in the world, we had to be very careful and just have a little bit of distance between us, not because we didn't like them, but because it was a sort of the breathing zone. So now we are being drawn in much, much closer. And in a way, our fears are coming true because we're seeing that our policies are becoming more and more the policies simply of our neighbor. We don't anymore seem to have our own policies. Because I think traditionally our own policies would be much more to support what you support inside Mexico. Instead of that, we're supporting things inside Mexico that I don't think Canadians would naturally identify with, you know.
What we called is the mouse next to the elephant. So maybe if the two mice can get together, we can have some effect on the elephant, or some effect on the coalition between the two mice and the elephant.
I prefer to call two lions.
Et convoitant ce ne nichait pas au cœur seul de mon époux, vertu ne m'était pas connue.
Marie Laberge has taken on two very difficult challenges for a playwright. She wrote a play in Old French, and she acts in it herself. I feel I've left North America tonight, but really, I'm in Montreal, the second largest French-speaking city in the world.
Bonjour, je suis Homero Aridgis de Mexique, mexicane. Félicitations.
Merci beaucoup, vous êtes bien fait, c'est bien bon.
Merveilleusement.
Avez-vous tout compris? C'est déjà difficile,
pas tout compris parce qu'il y a la langue ancienne. J'ai compris les sujets et toute l'histoire d'amour et de...
Vous avez compris l'amour? Vous avez compris le principal? C'est correct.
Nécessairement, si on perd un centimètre de nos acquis,
the threat comes from the United States and its absolutely undeniable cultural imperialism. English Canadians find it difficult to see themselves as different from the Americans. That creates certain problems. They are inundated with American television, and that's a very powerful influence, of course. Education doesn't happen only in school. It also comes from the streets, from television, from the arts, and that's where a culture can use or create itself. And yes, I do believe we're still threatened.
I'm a little surprised to find the concerns of Marie Laberge largely the same as those of John Saul and other English-speaking Canadian writers. But there are still very real differences between English and French.
Is it difficult to understand why we want to separate? Is it difficult for you?
Yes, because coming from Mexico, we see Canada as a unified country, with all its cultural differences, including the French language.
Yes, but the cultural differences you're talking about, you've been to English Canada, they're not perceived by the Americans. They don't know that here we speak French. People say Canada is a bilingual country. That's false. Canada is English-speaking with a few pockets of French culture, extremely fragile, extremely small, and very threatened.
I realize the situation of French-speaking Canadians is unique in the Americas. Even though they live in the only officially bilingual country on the continent, there's a real danger of assimilation. They are only 1% of the population of the Americas. I expected to find a greater sense of cultural unity in Canada. John Saul and I explored the niceties of Canadian culture on the flight from Calgary to Toronto.
You know, the Canadian point of view is, it's the exact opposite of the American point of view in a sense, which is that, or the European point of view, which is, there's nothing wrong with the differences. You should celebrate the differences. Yes. You should make use of the differences.
Tolerate the differences.
Well, no, more than tolerate. You should build on the differences.
Yes.
It moves me to know it's possible to become a citizen of the Americas without denying one's past. My father was born in Greece, but when he arrived in Mexico, he had to forget his culture and quickly become Mexican. Marie Laberge took me to an Italian cafe in her neighborhood to discuss cultural coexistence.
C'est la ville qui est ce que sera le Québec.
Montreal is what all of Quebec will be in 20 years. Or less, because we're having very few babies. So we have a lot of immigration. And that immigration will color our country. When I say country, I mean Quebec, because for me, it's my country. It's a francophone community that must integrate its immigrants.
I learned that John Saul's family has been here for 2 centuries and includes many ethnicities, a model of integration.
My family started coming to Canada with the American Revolution, fleeing the Americans, so, 1780. And really, with every generation, they married into another arrival of immigrants. And at first, they were marrying, more Scots and more English and more Irish. Now, my family's got a Polish part to it, and a Polish-Canadian part, and an Icelandic part, a Chinese part, and who knows after that? So I think, in some ways it does reflect what's been happening in Toronto.
Your family is the 5 continents now.
Yes, that's right. I don't know what people understand by the word cosmopolitan, but for me, what the word means is a mixture of races. And if that's what cosmopolitan means, this is the most cosmopolitan city in the world, because I don't know of any other city where there's such a vast mixture of groups and races.
More than New York?
Oh, much more than New York, New York's much more, there are, several large groups. There's a much wider spectrum here, I always feel, than in New York. When you walk through the streets of Toronto, you're not quite sure which group dominates. In New York, you walk through and you have the sense that 1 or 2 groups dominate.
I wonder if Canada is a microcosm of the Americas. No other continent contains such diversity of races, colors, languages, heritages as the Americas. Despite all this, I worry about how to maintain this diversity. United States culture permeates every home through television. We feel its influence already, especially among young people.
Easy, we're going. It's just really easy.
On the elephant, or some effect on the...
As John said, I had the feeling that the public education is a disaster. Illiteracy is general. Very few people is reading books. And that is just the general feeling. As a cultural collapse, not only in Mexico, but in the Americas, no?
And your television is largely American.
Exactly. It's violence, sex, or stupid comedies. But it's just the pattern every day. Is what they eat visually, the Mexican families.
The victory of Mickey Mouse.
Yes. Well, Mickey Mouse is the only universal symbol of the 20th century.
Yes,
no?
Yes, we were saying that that's a very accurate idea. And as you can see, it's extremely crowded.
I like the idea of an America open to others, an America where everyone can express themselves in French as well as in Spanish, where John Saul's Anglo-Saxon world continues to be different from that of Mickey Mouse. All this makes me think of the vision of the Mexican philosopher José Vasconcelos. In the 30s, he was already saying that the being that inhabits the Americas could become a cosmic being. He believed the American soul should encompass all races and culture. The cosmic soul would be able to give, but also receive. For the Uruguayan poet Eduardo Galeano, we are still a long way from this vision.
The Americas are totally infected with racism. Infected with racism from north to south. The pyramid has whites on top and people of color at the bottom. That's what we call racial democracy in America. The rights of whites on top, the rights of black, Indian, Métis, mulatto on the bottom. And all this because we live in Bobalia, the land of great stupidity. Racism is a crime that offends what's best in the human soul. Its vocation for justice, liberty, solidarity. Racism is also a crime which offends our intelligence, condemning us to stupidity. Why do I say condemning us to stupidity? Because we become blind to our most beautiful images, deaf to our most meaningful voices.